Here's Abraham. He's dragged his wife Sarah along on this moon-advised journey. He's now stuck in some podunk town that doesn't even exist yet. His nephew Lot is taking along, and he's his new responsibility, all because his father has just died and left them stranded along the road. Like, this is where he's supposed to turn to the camera and say, "Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up here." And that line, it's a cliche precisely because, we've all been there, right? Now, maybe not because you made some terrible decision or because you messed up anything in particular. Maybe just simply because you found yourself in a place you didn't expect to be, wondering about what might come next. Almost 22 years ago, sounds like a long time, almost 22 years ago, I moved to Calgary. And I came out here to take a job as a pastor. Now, that decision was one of the best of my life. I landed in a city that I absolutely love, in a province where I have adopted both of my kids. I spent a decade at a church that brought me here, learning, evolving, and being given incredible opportunities far above my pay grade. I then got to play a part in starting Commons just over 11 years ago. I now get to play a part in starting Commons all over again in Marda Loop for a new decade. So I'm very grateful for all of it. But in the 2 years or so before I moved to Calgary, I found myself somewhere like Haran. I had gotten involved in church in high school, last couple of years, graduated and then went straight to a Bible college. Was hired right away at a church in Toronto. Everything was turning up Jeremy at that point. But I found out pretty quickly that it was not quite what I had expected. Long hair or not, Timu Jesus was not the gig I thought it was going to be. Now, that's not to say it was bad. In fact, I don't have anything bad to say about that first community I worked in. But I will say I did know pretty quickly it wasn't going to be for me. And so I quit and I left. And I found myself in my mid-20s, married with a mortgage and a Bible college degree, working part-time at Best Buy, trying to pick up enough shifts to make it all work. And I did, for which I'm very grateful. I ended up starting a little business, and I focused on that for about a year of my life. But this was very much an in-between space for me. I'd stepped out of one story, left as it were, and yet I hadn't quite figured out where I was going yet. I'm still stuck on the road toward what was next. Now, the irony, of course, is that I would eventually find myself back in a church, just like Abraham found himself landing in Canaan, where his father had always intended. But I think there are times when I have looked back and thought about those years, that in-between space, as just a page flip between two chapters. Abraham maybe felt that way about Haran. There was his life in where he grew up. There's one verse in Haran, then his whole story in Canaan. I get it. Maybe you have a period like that in your life as well. But the truth is, if I'm honest with myself, that chapter there, more important than I give it credit for. Because this chapter here, the one that I love in Calgary at Commons, it doesn't happen without what felt like a big pause button back there. If I'm honest with myself, there's no way I become the pastor I am today, or even think about God the way that I do today, without having stepped out of the church to see the world with what would become more seasoned eyes eventually. And so this week, as I'm reading this story and I'm thinking about this gap between the last verse of chapter 11, my dad has died, I'm stuck in Haran. And the first verse of chapter 12, the Lord God of heaven and earth has called me to go somewhere new and change the world. I keep wondering about Abraham sitting with Sarah in Haran, sad about his dad, asking how he ended up here and what might possibly be next. Was that a week? A month? Did he wait a year or two like I did? Maybe a decade? More? I don't know. Honestly, his dad lived to 205. It's not like he didn't have time on his side. But how long did Abraham do his best with just what was in front of him, waiting to hear about what would be next? Two things are important here. First, these kinds of pauses in our lives are not the kind of moments we're ever going to write our stories about. That's fine. That's fine. Not every moment of your life can be exhilarating. We probably don't want that either. But that shouldn't lead us to believe that nothing is happening just because the surface of our life is still. Sometimes moments of pause, rest, these are where some of the most important things are happening for us. Maybe things are shifting in us, how we think or how we perceive ourselves. Our imaginations are being primed for possibilities we couldn't comprehend without a period of rest. So if you find yourself in that space, in between, waiting for what's next, maybe even a little frustrated that you haven't figured it out yet, understand you can do that passively, sit and wait until you hear the voice of God. And who knows, maybe you will. God is gracious like that. But I also believe you can wait for what's next very actively. Maybe you know a season is coming to an end and you don't know what's on the horizon yet. Now is the time to dig in and do the work, to think about your goals, to reflect on your motivations, to figure out what you're scared of, so that when opportunities present themselves, you can be ready to leap headlong into the unknown. But you do that work absolutely convinced that though the ground is hard, there are seeds of what's next below the surface making their way toward the light, and you're convinced you're going to be ready whenever they break through the crust. Like sometimes we work hard to get somewhere new. Sometimes we work hard to become the person who's ready to go somewhere new.